It was winter in 1823. A group of men who traded animal furs traveled north through frozen rivers. Their sleds were full of things to trade, and dogs pulled them through the cold. Life was hard, but they were used to it. Then strange things started happening. They saw bark torn off from high up on trees. They found bones that had been scraped completely clean. They heard a scary cry in the woods that no one could explain. At night, they would smell something bad first. Then they would hear footsteps walking around their campfire. In the frozen, quiet north, something was hunting them. It was thin, starving, and patient. Before their trip ended, they would learn why people only whispered about stories of the Wendigo. So before we continue, please make sure you leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. We had 5 men in our group. Matthew was our leader. He had a thick beard that grew in a strange way because of an old burn. He talked using short words that could be heard over the wind. Kerr was the clerk. He was older than the rest of us and carefully guarded the letters we carried. I had learned from him the year before. Jules drove the second sled. He would joke with the dogs when they got lazy. Our hunter and guide was an older man named Wepon. He moved carefully but was never slow. He talked to the dogs in his language. He talked to us in simple Cree and French words that helped us work together. The man who ran the post had warned us about thin ice in narrow turns and wolves in the woods, but we worried more about running out of food than about wolves. We had flour, dried peas, and a barrel of fat. We hoped to find caribou near the Long Lakes. The first week went well. We started moving before the sun came up. We ate cold bannock bread during our breaks. We reached groups of spruce trees by mid-afternoon. We cut branches to sleep on and put up canvas tents. We split small pieces of wood for fires. The dogs curled up into balls and covered their noses with their tails. My hands cracked at the knuckles from the cold. Every evening I wrote by the fire. My breath came out in short puffs. The ink got thick from the cold. On the 10th day, we reached an area of low rocks and bushes where the river got wider and slower. The ice looked dull and had small holes in it. Wapon tested it with his pole. He stepped forward and waited. Then he waved for us to follow. Jules's sled made a groaning sound as it went over a crack. For a moment, the back part sank down. The dogs pulled it through and we kept our eyes on the far side of the river. When we reached solid ice again, Matthew told us to rest. He said the dogs needed more fat and so did we. We cut thin slices from the barrel and let them melt on our tongues. The warmth spread through our chests in a good way. That night, the wind picked up. It pushed through the spruce trees and made a long, steady sound. We had our canvas tent up and good coals burning. But the cold pushed through the openings. I woke up twice to add wood to the fire. Before dawn, the dogs started moving around and whining. It wasn't loud, but they seemed nervous. I went outside to check on them. I didn't see anything moving. The sky was hazy and had a thin ring around the moon. Frost had formed on the ropes. When I turned around, I saw Wapon was awake. He sat at the edge of the firelight with his blanket around his shoulders. He watched the darkness. His face was still, like he was thinking about something. We left camp before the sun touched the tops of the trees. The snow had a hard crust on top. It held your weight on the first step, then broke under the second step. The work tired us out. We reached a narrow valley where the river bent and split around a line of rocks. There we found signs that should not have been there. The snow was all churned up around an old fire ring. Bones were scattered everywhere. They weren't from a fresh kill. They were old bones that had been cracked open and scraped. The inside part where the marrow is was completely clean. Kerr bent down and poked one bone with his mitten. He said someone had done a poor job using them. Wapon didn't say anything at first. He walked in a circle once. Then he pointed to a birch tree near the edge. The bark was torn off in long strips higher than any man could reach. The wood underneath had deep scratches. The marks were deep and uneven. We argued for a short time about what it meant. Jules said wolves could jump that high. I said a bear might have done it in the fall. Matthew shook his head. He said a bear would have left different marks. Also, bears sleep during winter. Wapon told us to leave that place. He didn't raise his voice, but the way he said it stopped our talking. We left without eating. We walked for 2 hours before we stopped to drink water. The air felt closer, like the trees were pressing in on us. The trail showed old caribou tracks and a few fresh ones going east. We followed the fresh tracks until they turned toward higher ground that our sleds couldn't climb. The dogs pulled hard on their lines, very interested in something. Then they settled down when we kept going. That afternoon, we heard a call from the woods to our right. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't any bird I knew. The sound was high and lasted a long time. Then it dropped into a harsh note. The dogs stopped and looked toward the trees. Jules cursed and told them to keep moving. I saw Kerr's jaw get tight. He told Matthew that we should reach the next lake before stopping for the night. Wapen stood still until the sound went away. He told us to stay in the open areas as much as the river would let us. He didn't explain why. I wanted to ask, but I decided not to push him. We reached the lake as the light got dim. The surface looked safe. We crossed to an island with spruce trees to block the wind. We built 2 small fires instead of 1 big fire. This gave more steady heat and spread the smoke around. Wapen set small snares to catch rabbits in the bushes. He made quick loops in narrow paths where rabbits run. The rest of us melted snow and boiled pea soup with bits of fat. When we ate, no one talked much. The sound from the woods had bothered all of us. I tried to think about letters from home that would come in the spring, but my mind went back to the torn bark and the empty marrow inside the bones. After we finished eating, I walked out onto the lake. My coat was tight and my scarf was crossed under my chin. I wanted a moment where the fire wasn't filling my eyes. The night spread out in every direction. The sky was clear and hard. I heard a thin cracking sound run under the ice. Then it got quiet. I looked back at our campsite. I saw the 2 fires as 2 steady points of light, with the canvas tent behind them. On the far side of the lake, past our sleds, I saw something move. A shape crossed from the shadow of a spruce tree to the open edge. Then it stopped. It stood upright. That was all I could tell. It didn't move again. I stood there and counted to 20. My mouth felt dry. I walked back to camp. I didn't run, but I walked fast. I told Matthew what I saw. He asked everyone to be quiet. He asked me where I had seen it. By then, the shape was gone. We stood and watched the edge of the lake. The dogs had started shuffling their feet and making low sounds in their throats. Kerr said it could be a man. Jules said a starving man would be crawling toward our fire, not standing in the dark. Wapon listened. Then he said in a flat voice that some things wait and watch. He said a name in his language. Then he gave us the word we knew, Wendigo. He didn't preach or try to scare us. He spoke like he was just telling us about the weather. I had heard that word before at the post. Voyagers would say it when they were trying to pass the evening. They said it like it was half a joke with drinks in their hands. None of us answered Wapon for a while. Then Kerr said we were tired. He said the bark marks only showed that something was hungry, not that there were spirits. He spoke carefully, his voice steady. Matthew nodded. He said we would post watches in pairs. He put me first with Jules. He told us to keep the fires burning and have the rifles ready. The dogs settled into circles again, but they didn't sleep deeply. Their ears lifted up and down. Jules and I stood our first hour at the edge of camp. The cold made my cheeks sting. The stars turned slowly over the black tops of the spruce trees. We heard the ice make sounds now and then. We heard branches pop from the cold. We didn't hear that call again. Jules tried to talk about fish at the post and a girl near the fort who bought cloth from the store, but his words drifted off and stopped. He kept his mitten on the handle of his gun. I walked back and forth between the fires. I checked the dogs and came back to the edge. The night didn't change. I began to think we had worked ourselves into being scared over nothing. When our turn ended, I lay down and closed my eyes. Sleep came, but not deeply. I woke up to footsteps near my blanket. I reached for my rifle, but it was only Matthew walking toward the fire with more wood. He nodded at me. I rolled onto my side, then I smelled it. At first it was faint, hidden under the wood smoke and fat smell. It was a sour, stale smell. It came from the darkness beyond the dogs. Now I was fully awake. I sat up. I saw that Wapon was already standing. He didn't have a gun in his hand. He had his snowshoes on. He moved toward where the smell was coming from. He walked silently in a straight line and stopped 10 steps past the dogs. He bent down and touched the snow. When he stood up, he looked at me and then at Matthew. He didn't speak. He walked back and sat by the fire. The smell went away and the night stayed quiet. We left camp at first light without talking about what had happened. The dogs pulled hard. They wanted to move. The day got colder. Our breath froze on our beards and scarves in a hard crust. We traveled fast until midday. We only stopped long enough to drink and swallow a handful of bannock bread. In the afternoon, we came to a line of tracks that crossed the river and went into the trees on the far side. The space between steps was long. The prints weren't clear, but they weren't from a moose. They weren't human in the way I knew. We stood around them and tried to guess what made them. Our guesses sounded weak in the air. Wapon told us to keep moving and to walk at a steady pace. He set his shoulders and took the lead. None of us argued. We kept a strong pace through the afternoon. We reached a long, straight part of the river that cut between low hills. The wind pressed down and kept the surface clean of new snow. We didn't talk much. I watched the back of Wapon's parka and the pole he carried swaying. Kerr walked with his head down, like he was listening to the ice or to his own thoughts. Jules kept looking behind us, which made the dogs nervous. Matthew said nothing. He drove the lead sled with short sounds that kept the team in line. Toward evening, the sky changed. A band of clouds built up from the west. It was dark at the bottom and moved slowly. The air got very calm, which I didn't like. We pushed toward a group of spruce trees on a hill above the river. That way we would have dry wood if the weather got bad. The climb up from the ice was steep. We pulled the sleds together as teams. The runners scraped and the dogs dug in with their paws. By the time we had the second sled up, the wind had changed. It started dropping fine grains of snow that stung our faces. We made a tight camp on the side of the hill that blocked the wind. We cut deep piles of branches. Matthew had us set up a third small fire to dry our mittens and socks faster. We ate early. We only ate a little because the day's hard work had taken more from the dogs than we planned. The snow came hard after dark. It came straight down at first. Then it turned with the wind and blew across the ground. The fires burned steady but low. We set the canvas tent very close around us and weighed down the edges. I checked on the dogs. They lay in holes they had dug. They kept their noses tucked under their tails. Their bodies shook now and then, not from fear but from cold. I went back to the fire. I found Kerr staring at the flames with his hands stretched out. He looked up at me. He said he felt the ground under him rise and fall, like a drum was beating far away. He asked if I felt it. I told him I didn't. He rubbed his wrists. He said he had been dreaming of summer grass. That struck me as a strange thing to share. Then he shook his head and fixed the log in the fire. The night stretched on. I dozed off and woke up over and over. I measured time by how the heat faded from my front and the cold crept into my back. Near midnight, the wind dropped enough to make the silence stand out. I heard the snow slide off the canvas. I heard small ticking sounds of ice forming on the edges of the kettles. Then all the dogs went completely still at once. That quietness went past the wind and made me sit up. I could smell the smoke in our boiled cloth. Under it was that same sour smell from the night before. I nudged Jules with my boot. His eyes were already open. He lifted his rifle without saying a word. Matthew checked around the outside of camp. He didn't find anything near. He woke up Wapon, who stood up with his blanket over his shoulders. He looked past us into the dark beyond the dogs. After a long moment, he told us in a flat voice to pull the food sacks inside the canvas tent. He said to bring the barrel of fat closer to the fire. He said we should burn the bones from the last 2 days and bury the ashes in clean snow. We did what he said. It felt wrong to do this work at night in a storm, but it made our minds calmer to move our hands. The smell in the air seemed to get lighter. We kept a small lamp burning near the food sack after that. We hadn't done that before. Sleep came back in short pieces. By morning, the sky had cleared and the air was very cold. It cut deep into your lungs. The world looked flat and sharp. Every line was clean. The snow drifts came up to our knees in some places. We dug out the sleds. We fed the dogs a big meal and left camp as fast as we could in that cold. When we reached the river, the snow had covered the old trail. The wind had made small waves across the surface. We went in single file and made a new trail. After an hour, we found that our trail from the day before had not been as empty as it looked. New tracks ran alongside our old trail. They were close at some points and farther away at others. The prints were sunk deep even though the snow had a crust on top. They crossed our line twice. Once they were close to a place where we had stopped to drink. The space between the prints was long and uneven. It looked like whatever made them had been running, then standing, then moving again. None of us spoke for a long time. Around midday, we reached a narrow part where the river got tight between two ridges. The water under the ice moved fast. The surface sounded hollow when Wapon hit it with his pole. We wanted to go around the bend, but the sides were too steep to climb with the sleds. We spread out so we wouldn't put too much weight on one spot. We tied a rope from the first sled to the second so we could pull together if one started to sink. We were 5 steps in when the ice shifted. A crack ran from the left side to the right side with a clean snapping sound. The front part of the lead sled went down. The dogs scrambled and clawed at the ice. Matthew shouted for us to hold on. The second sled pulled back and the rope went tight. For a moment, it looked like the whole team would slide into the water. Then the front part scraped up and the sled came back to level. Water had splashed up and frozen in flakes across the bundles. We dragged both sleds to the far side quickly. Our breath burned. Our legs felt heavy. Only when we stood on solid ground did we see that the ropes holding things down had loosened. One of the food sacks had slipped off. It was gone. We checked what we had. We had lost half a sack of flour and some small things wrapped with it. The barrel of fat was okay. The letters were safe, which made Kerr feel better. The loss made our supplies tighter. Matthew said we would have to find caribou soon, or we would have to stretch our food in a way that would slow us down. Wapon said caribou stay near the big lakes, where the wind makes hard crust on the snow. He said our path went toward one he knew to the northeast. He spoke lightly, but I saw him looking at the line of trees more than before. We made camp early that day. We needed to dry the sled gear and check every rope that held things down. The place we chose was a small hollow with willow scrub. It gave poor wood but shelter from wind. Jules set snares to catch animals. I cut thin curls from a knot of spruce to help start the fires easier. Kerr, who didn't like small jobs, gathered armfuls of light willow that we could snap by hand. As dusk came, the dogs got stiff. They faced the ridge to the south. Their heads were low. Their bodies pointed like they saw game, but no sound came. I walked 20 steps out. I didn't see anything moving. The snow only showed wind marks. I stood for a while and tried to hear past my own breathing. There was no call, no breaking of branches, no sound of something heavy walking through brush. I came back to the fire and said nothing. That choice stayed with me all evening. We ate thin soup and dry bannock bread. No one liked it. I found myself thinking about the missing food. I didn't think of it as weight or number. I thought of it as a hole that the cold would try to fill by taking our strength. That thought made me angry in a way that had no target. I watched myself for that. Kerr took out the letters and checked the seals again. He did that often when he needed to calm his mind. He told me in a low voice that one letter was for a man at Pike Lake who had lost a son to fever. There was no kindness in what we carried, but it was still necessary. After the meal, Matthew set the watches again, this time still in pairs but with shorter turns. He said the storm and the river crossing had taken too much from us to risk longer watches. He put me with him for the first turn. We stood facing the ridge where the dogs had stared. The moon rose late and gave thin light. The night moved in small ways. Snow drifted a little. The fire hissed when a knot in the wood leaked sap. I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. The first hour passed without anything happening. I felt some of the tightness in my shoulders ease. Then the smell came back. It was stronger than before. It was old meat and rot, and a faint sour note like wet animal hides left stacked. It came from the ridge. It rolled in, settled, and didn't go away. The dogs leaned back on their lines. They started making a low sound from their throats. Matthew lifted his hand and we stood still. I felt the hair on my arm stand up, even though the air was so cold I could barely feel my skin. We waited. The smell didn't move. Kerr woke up without being called. He came to us with his eyes wide and his breath short. Jules moved behind us with his rifle at his shoulder. Wapon walked out ahead of us. He didn't walk fast. He raised his hand. He called out in his language. It wasn't loud. The words sounded simple and plain, like greetings at a doorway. He stood with his arms at his sides. He said another short line and waited. The ridge gave no answer. The smell started to get lighter. We stayed where we were until our turn ended. When I lay down, I didn't sleep. I watched the canvas ripple at the bottom where the wind found a gap. I counted out slowly to pass the time. I heard steps in the snow. They weren't close, but they weren't far. They went along the edge of our camp and then away toward the river. I lifted my head. I saw that Wapon was awake. His eyes were open. He followed the sound without moving. He didn't look at me. He didn't speak. When the steps faded away, he closed his eyes. But I don't think he slept. We started moving before first light. The cold had a hard bite that morning. It made speech short and the dogs tight in their harnesses. We climbed out of the hollow. We followed a shallow valley toward the lake that Wapon had told us about. The land opened up after an hour. The trees fell away and the wind hit us from the side. The snow here was thinner and had crust. The sleds ran better. We covered good distance. Around midday, we found fresh tracks from caribou. 2 animals moving north. We sped up. The dogs lifted their heads and pulled steady. We went over a low rise and saw the lake ahead. It was long and wide, with the far shore lined with mixed spruce and jack pine. Thin snow snaked across the ice. We headed for a small point on the near shore, where the wind would give us shelter and a good view. We set up fast and left the sleds where they were. Wapon took me and Jules out on snowshoes to follow the caribou trail along the edge. Matthew stayed with Kerr to take care of the dogs at camp. We moved slow. We stepped in each other's footprints to save strength. The tracks led along a low band of willow. Then they cut across a shallow bay. We saw the pair feeding among exposed lichens on a ridge beyond the bay. Their heads were down. Their tails were steady. The wind was right for us. We crawled the last part to the edge of the bay. We lay still until the animals lifted their heads and turned. When they put their heads down again, we stood up and moved in a crouch to get closer. The shot cracked once. Jules made the first clean hit in the lungs. The second caribou jumped and ran along the ridge. I fired and missed high. It turned and paused. Jules shot again and hit it through the shoulder. It stumbled and fell. We stood and breathed. We didn't call out. We went to the animals and did what needed to be done without waiting. Blood steamed on the snow. We worked with knives that felt clumsy in our stiff fingers. We took what we could pack and left what we couldn't move. We covered what was left with clean snow to keep the ravens from carrying the sight across the sky. On the ridge above where the second animal had fallen, I found bark torn back from a pine tree. The scratches were deep. The height was wrong for any animal we knew. I called to Wapon and pointed. He looked for a long moment. Then he told us to carry the meat and move. His face showed nothing, but his voice had no doubt. We hauled the meat back to camp, working hard. We said nothing about the tree. The dogs smelled the blood before we even reached camp. They barked and pulled at their lines. Their eyes were fixed on the sleds like they couldn't wait another second. Kerr tried to quiet them, but his voice did little. Matthew came out from the fire with his rifle in hand. Then he lowered it when he saw us dragging the loads. The relief on his face was clear. Food meant days, maybe weeks of safety from hunger. We laid the meat out on a tarp. We packed snow around it to slow the freezing. The smell rose through the camp. It was sharp and heavy. It mixed with the wood smoke and fat until it seemed to stick to every piece of cloth. We ate well that night. Wapon boiled strips of meat in a kettle with fat. The dogs tore at their share until they lay in a heap with their bellies round and their eyes closed. For the first time in days, no one measured how much he put in his mouth. Kerr even laughed once. It was a dry sound. Jules had spilled a cup of broth on his boots and cursed at the burn. The warmth spread through me, steady and strong. Still, I couldn't forget the torn bark I had seen above the ridge. I waited for Wapon to talk about it, but he never did. He sat close to the fire with his hands on his knees. He looked at the flames like he was reading something in them. We didn't set snares that night. The meat was enough. Watches were posted as usual. I took the second turn with Kerr. The air was still. There was only the faint hiss of snow drifting off the pine trees. The lake stretched out dark and wide. The ice groaned now and then, like the weight of the cold itself was pressing down. Kerr held his rifle across his knees. He kept looking toward the shadows beyond the firelight. He asked me what I thought about the tracks we had seen days before. The ones that weren't moose weren't man. I told him the truth. I didn't know. He nodded like that answer was all he had expected. He said the smell we had noticed was worse in his dreams. I asked him what he meant. He didn't explain. He only looked back at the dark. Our watch passed without sound. At dawn, the sky was pale and cloudless. The air cut like glass. We fed the dogs and left camp quickly. There was no shelter except a scatter of small willows. The light felt thin against the dark, pressing close. That night was worse. The smell came back. It was thick and sour. It rolled over camp until it filled every breath. The dogs whined and clawed at the snow, trying to burrow under it. Then we heard it. A long cry, the same as before. It rose high until it cracked into something harsh. It carried through the trees, closer than ever. The men froze. Each one grabbed his rifle. Kerr muttered prayers again. His lips were shaking. Jules cursed. He said we should fire into the dark. But Matthew cut him off. He said nothing would come from wasting powder. Wapan stood still. His head was lowered like he was listening past the cry. When it ended, he said only that we should not move until day. The night dragged on. Each time I closed my eyes, I woke to the sound of steps circling our camp. They were slow and heavy. Once I thought I saw a shape at the edge of the firelight. It was tall and thin. Antlers caught the faint glow before fading back into the trees. I told myself it was shadow and smoke, but the smell got thicker then, stronger than ever. At dawn, we found the tracks. They were pressed deep into the snow. They were bigger than any man's. They were longer than any bear's. They circled the camp twice. Then they cut back into the trees. The dogs wouldn't eat. They pulled at their harnesses and whined. Jules stared at the prints. His jaw was tight. His eyes were wide. Kerr said nothing at all. He only kept his head down. Matthew told us to move quickly. His voice was sharp now, with no calmness left. We marched hard through the morning. Every man bent to pull the sleds. The snow had stopped. The sky was pale and flat. The air burned in my lungs with each breath. Behind us, the trail stretched clear. I couldn't stop looking back. By midday, we reached higher ground. The trees thinned into low scrub. The wind came back, cutting hard across the ridge. From there, I looked back over the flat land. For a moment, I thought I saw it, tall still at the edge of the spruce trees, watching. We made camp before dusk. We pressed against the side of a rocky outcrop. The stone gave little shelter, but it was better than open ground. We built 2 fires this time, one at each end of camp. We tried to make the light spread wide. The meat boiled strong, but no one ate much. Kerr sat apart, holding the packet of letters like they could protect him. Jules muttered that if the thing came again, he would shoot no matter what Wapan said. Matthew told him to stay calm or he would deal with him himself. The words had weight, but I saw fear in Matthew's eyes too. When night came, the fires burned high, but the dark felt closer than ever. I stood watch with Jules. The wind hissed through the rocks. It carried the smell. Faint at first, then stronger. My throat closed with it. My stomach turned. Jules gripped his rifle so tight his knuckles showed white. He whispered that it was close. He said he could hear it breathing. I told him to stay calm. But before I finished, the cry split the night. It was closer than it had ever been. It rose high above the ridge. Then it dropped low until the ground itself seemed to shake. The dogs went crazy. They snapped and pulled. Their howls cut through the cry. The men jumped to their feet with rifles raised. At the edge of the firelight, shapes moved, tall, thin, just beyond what we could see clearly. They slipped between shadow and flame. The smell rolled over us, choking, thick with rot and cold. My hands shook. The rifle felt heavy. My breath came sharp in my chest. Jules raised his gun. His finger was on the trigger. His eyes were wide. Then from the dark, a figure stepped closer, tall, antlers twisted, eyes like dark pits. It moved slow, deliberate. The firelight touched its face. The skin was gray and stretched tight. The mouth was too wide. The teeth were jagged and sharp. It stood there watching, like it was waiting for us to break. It stood at the edge of the firelight. Its shadow stretched long across the snow. Its head tilted side to side like it was measuring us. The smell got thicker until it felt like breathing in spoiled blood. The dogs pulled so hard the sleds shifted against the rocks. Jules raised his rifle, but Wapan stepped forward fast and knocked the barrel down again. He said no shot would drive it away. It would only bring it closer. His voice was steady, but his eyes never left the figure. Matthew shouted for the fires to be fed higher. We threw on what wood we had. The flames rose. Sparks flew into the dark. The figure didn't move back. It stood there, half lit, half shadow. Its breath made fog in the air, but it made no sound. Its arms and legs twitched now and then, like hunger was pulling at them. My hands shook so badly on the rifle that I pressed it to my chest to keep steady. Then, without warning, it stepped forward. One long step, then another. The firelight touched its whole body. It was so thin. Bones stuck out sharp under the stretched skin. Ribs showed like bars. Its arms hung low. Its hands had claws black against the snow. The antlers rose twisted and uneven, scraping the branches above. The dogs howled. They snapped their lines. Kerr fell to his knees. He clutched the letters tight to his chest, whispering words none of us could hear. Jules pulled his rifle up again. His eyes were wide. His teeth were clenched. Before he could fire, Wapon shouted. His words came in his own language, sharp, strong, like commands to the storm. He held both hands out with palms open. His voice rose in a rhythm that cut through the dogs and the wind. The figure stopped. Its head tilted. The dark pits of its eyes locked on him. The smell grew so thick I gagged behind my scarf. The Wendigo bent slightly. Its chest rose and fell in slow movements. Then it let out a sound. A low, rattling groan that made my teeth ache. It didn't rush at us. It circled, step by step, slow, deliberate, just beyond the fires. The dogs spun. Their lines got tangled. Their eyes were wild. We turned with it, rifles ready, breath short, hearts pounding. Each time it came near the firelight, it stopped. It stared at us with its hollow gaze. Then it moved on. The circle got tighter. Jules swore under his breath. He raised his rifle again. This time Matthew didn't stop him, he fired. The shot cracked through the night. Smoke burst from the barrel. The echo rolled across the ridge. The figure jerked once. Its shoulder snapped back. For a moment I thought it would fall, but it didn't. It turned its head slow. Its eyes seemed to sink deeper. The groan rose again, louder this time. Then it lunged forward. So fast I barely saw it move. The dogs screamed. They snapped their harnesses. Jules fell back, trying to reload. Matthew shouted for us to hold the line. I fired without aiming. The shot tore into its chest, but it didn't stop. It moved through the smoke. Its claws flashed in the firelight. Wapon shouted again, louder than before. His words cut sharp. His hands raised high. The Wendigo slowed. For a breath, it stood still. Its chest heaved. Steam rose from the wounds, then it let out a scream. A sound so sharp it cut through bone and blood. A sound that made the fires whip, as if the wind itself had turned against us. The dogs broke free. They scattered into the dark. The sleds tipped over. Meat and gear spilled across the snow. Kerr dropped the letters. His hands shook too much to hold them. The Wendigo turned its head once more. It looked at each of us in turn. Then it stepped back into the dark. Its shape faded into the trees. The smell trailed after it until the air was clean again. Only the crackle of fire and the panting of men remained. We stood there with rifles in hand and hearts racing, waiting for it to come back, but it didn't. Not that night. When dawn came, the ground told the truth. The snow beyond the fires was churned up with prints, deep, wide, circling tight around us. Blood marked the trail where the bullets had hit. It was dark against the white. The dogs were gone. They had scattered into the timber. Half our meat was spilled, frozen stiff in the snow. The sleds lay on their sides. Gear was scattered everywhere. Matthew said we had to move. His voice was hoarse, but there was no room for doubt. Wapon gathered the spilled meat with steady hands. His eyes stayed fixed on the line of trees. Kerr picked up the letters from where they had fallen. His hands were shaking. Jules said nothing at all. We tied what we could to the sleds. We set out on foot, pulling the runners ourselves. The trail ahead was harder now. The weight on our shoulders was heavier than before. Each step carried the knowledge that it still followed. Waiting, hungering, watching. We dragged the sleds ourselves. The dogs were lost to the night. The harness straps cut into my shoulders. Every step felt heavier than the last. The snow was firm on top, but each time the runners caught on buried ice, the jolt pulled my arms until I thought they would tear. No one spoke. Even Jules, who always cursed under his breath, moved in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of the runners and the rasp of our breath. The sun was weak that day. It was barely a pale circle behind thin clouds. By midday, the cold bit so deep I couldn't feel my fingers. We stopped only long enough to chew strips of frozen meat and swallow snow. Kerr walked with the packet of letters held tight under his coat. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. Matthew pushed us harder than before. His face was set, but I could see the fear in his eyes each time he looked at the line of trees. Wapon kept to the lead. His pace was steady. His head turned often to listen. Late in the afternoon, we came to a ridge that looked over a frozen valley. The wind blew hard there. It swept the snow clean so the ice below shone like glass. Wapan stopped and raised his hand. Down in the valley, near a line of spruce trees, the figure stood again. Tall, thin, the antlers twisted. The grey body still as stone. The distance between us and it was wide. But even from the ridge, the smell carried. Faint and sour, none of us moved. My breath caught in my throat. The cold air burned as I tried to keep still. Jules gripped his rifle, but Matthew shook his head before he could lift it. We stood until the figure tilted its head back slowly, like it was testing the air. Then it sank down into the shadow of the trees and was gone. We didn't cross that valley. Wapan led us along the ridge instead. The climb was steep and nearly broke us. The sleds scraped and tipped. Gear spilled. We didn't stop to pick it up. By the time we reached the far side, the light had thinned and the wind cut harder. We found a hollow against a line of stone and made camp there. We were too tired to go farther. The fires burned weak. We had little wood left. The storm had soaked what we found. That night, the smell came back stronger than ever. It seeped through the camp. It curled around the fires. It filled our lungs until it felt like it lived inside us. The dogs were gone, but I heard howls in the distance. Thin and ragged, not like wolves Kerr broke then. He dropped the letters into the snow. He clutched his head, rocking back and forth, muttering. Matthew grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him. He told him to stand. But Kerr only stared past him into the dark. His eyes were empty. Jules said to leave him. He said Kerr was already gone. Wapan said nothing. He fed more wood to the fire. His face was hard. His eyes were fixed outward. The cry came after midnight. It split the air like a knife. Long and shrill. Then it dropped into a rumble that shook the ground under us. I felt my chest tighten. My hands gripped the rifle so hard the wood cut into my palm. Shapes moved at the edge of the firelight, tall and thin, slipping between trees and rock. One stepped closer. Its antlers caught the light. Its eyes glowed faint. Dark pits rimmed with dull red. Jules fired without waiting. The shot cracked. Smoke burst. The shape staggered but didn't fall. It screamed. The sound tore the air. It lunged forward. Matthew fired next. Then I did. The bullet struck, but the thing kept moving. Its clawed hands reached out. Wapan shouted in his language again. His voice was louder than before. It rose in a rhythm that cut through the chaos. For a moment, the figure stopped. Then it rushed back into the dark, leaving the smell thick and choking. We held our rifles until our arms shook. We waited for the next strike, but none came. The shapes faded into the trees. The howls drifted away across the ridge. The smell stayed long after. Sour and heavy. When morning came, the tracks were everywhere. Circling camp, cutting across our trail. Pressed deep into the snow, blood marked the ground where the shots had hit. But not enough for a wound that should kill. We packed fast. We moved before the sun rose high. Kerr stumbled. His mind was broken. His body was weak. Matthew tied him to a sled so we could drag him when he fell down. Jules muttered that it was hopeless, but none of us answered. We marched on, each step slower, each breath heavier. By evening, the land opened into low hills. The trees thinned. Wapan said we were close to Pike Lake, no more than a day if we pushed hard. Hope flickered in me then. Faint but sharp, we camped in a shallow draw. The fires burned bright with what little wood we could gather. The men huddled close. Too tired for talk, Kerr lay silent, staring at the sky. That night I woke to silence. The fire had burned low. The men were asleep. The smell was thick, stronger than ever. So heavy it choked me awake. I stood up with my rifle in hand. I saw it standing at the edge of camp, tall, thin, antlers twisted, eyes like pits. It stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The firelight touched its face. The mouth opened wide. Rows of teeth, jagged and sharp. Breath steaming in the cold. I froze. My body locked. Then Wapan's voice rose behind me. Sharp, commanding. The words steady and strong. The Wendigo paused. Its head tilted. The red glow of its eyes dimmed. Wapan stepped forward. His hands raised. His chant filled the night. The figure shuddered once. Then it turned. It stepped back into the dark. The smell trailed after it. At dawn, Pike Lake lay before us. Its frozen surface stretched wide. The outpost was there, a faint line of smoke on the far shore. We stumbled across dragging sleds. Our bodies were weak but alive. When we reached the post, the gates opened. Voices called. Hands pulled us inside. Warmth hit my face. Wood smoke and the smell of food. I dropped to my knees and let the rifle fall. We never saw it again, but some nights when the air is still and the snow is deep, I smell it. Faint and sour, like it still waits out there, circling, watching, never letting go.